Hi, welcome to the Gooder Podcast. I'm your host, Diana Fright. As partner and CMO of Retail Voodoo, an award-winning branding agency, I have met and worked with some of the most amazing women in the naturals industry, food and beverage, wellness, and fitness. As such, I've decided to create the Gooder Podcast to interview these great people and subject matter experts. Have them share their insights and expertise to help businesses all around the world become gooder. I am so excited to introduce my guest today, Maggie Sadowsky, the president of 8-Track Foods, who is considered a thought leader in the naturals foods and a subject matter expert in plant-based proteins. Maggie graduated from Ohio State University with a BS in food science. She is a certified food scientist, from the Institute of Food Technologists, and holds advisory positions with the Good Food Institute and the U.S. Dry Bean Council Innovation Group. Before launching 8-Track Foods, Maggie owned the consulting firm The Culinary Architects, with clients including Conagra, Kellogg, and Beyond Meat. Welcome, Maggie. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me.
Of course. How's Chicago today? Right? Windy, I hear.
Oh my gosh, it's like crazy windy. I feel like we're like a cliche, but it's really windy today.
Well, I feel like for a Chicago person to say it's windy means something different than to maybe the rest of the country.
Yes, I feel like there's like garbage flying around, it's like the Wicked Witch of the West.
Oh, no. Listen, I am so excited for our conversation today. Just was super fascinated and enlightened and talking about beans with just about everybody since we last spoke. So I want to talk about the naturals industry, food waste, food science, and how beans might save the world. That's, what do we call those? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But first, before we talk about those bigger issues, let's talk about your brand, 8-Track Foods. Tell us about it and why it exists.
So yeah, absolutely. In the U.S., we waste over 40% of the food we grow, and 8-Track Foods, we're really about getting our food supply back on track by creating this sustainable food supply and not just a sustainable product. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's hard to get your head around, but as a food scientist and product developer, I really focused on just creating, clean label foods and plant-based foods. Mm-hmm. But there was this really strong disconnect for me on what was going on between looking at the entire supply chain and the packaging that we put in. So that's really why I created like the 8-Track, like this infinite loop of looking at every single point in the process mm-hmm. to make it work.
Mm-hmm. We have heard actually from a number of clients outside of shelf stable, like we'll just say beans, who have internally, when I've been talking about the brand, that we've had a number of clients who've said that beans are like literally the superfood in every way, shape, or form, sort of a lot like how hemp is in regards to its regenerative properties, right? But I think
I want to.
Pardon?
Yeah, I probably should back up and say like how I got on this like crazy bean path.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so like 4 years ago, somebody asked me kind of what the future I thought was happening in plant-based. And mm-hmm. I said beans, because I really do think they are kind of magical in so many ways. They just have been, one of this really underserviced commodities in mm-hmm. our country. And so I applied for this USDA grant to research more of the science. They've just been heavily underfunded and got rejected. But really just kept down the path. And then last summer, well, I guess it'd be 2019 summer, I really just made the strong shift that I was going to go in and source and figure out how to make this product better. And that's really what I did. And so, we looked at everything from how we source our ingredients to how we brine our beans to how we distribute are all different and really are designed to reduce food waste and single-use plastics.
Yeah, and then you've got the nutrient density and how beans actually reciprocate in the soil. And I mean, beans are really magical, all the way back to Jack and the Beanstalk. While the story's a little bit funny, there's a lot of magic in those beans.
It's so true.
Yeah. I want to go back just a little bit to in our conversation, at least when we were talking about Expo and the natural foods community and how it's changed, and the kind of the time of your aha moment on what you wanted to do with beans came at the time when both you and I think, experienced the same thing. Like, wow, I remember when going to Expo was filled with aura readings and it was a little bit hippie-ish in some way. And now, of course, the category has changed and matured, and so has the community. And well, it's changed a little bit culturally too, right? You articulated it so well when we spoke mostly about how this community change has had implications on food production and planet, etc. But can you talk about it here for everyone else to hear?
Oh, yes. I don't remember exactly what I said when I
okay.
spoke with
It's
you,
all right.
but yeah, I think in the early days of really going to the Natural Expo, it was really focused around small grocers and family environment where people were pushing strollers. And to me, it really felt like this like big community, and we were all sort of driving towards the greater good.
Mm-hmm.
In the last few years, I think we've seen, it evolve in the natural community.
Mm-hmm.
And evolve from the natural community,
Yeah.
I should say,
Yeah.
into the natural food industry. And to
Oh.
me, I think that we've lost a lot of that sense of community in what we're trying to accomplish. And so I think there's so many things that around the food show that became a lot more glamorous and big. As more money came into the place, we lost some of the smaller players. And that was really, for me, the aha moment that turned me from beans to a can of beans was I was actually sitting at the show and was struggling with a place to find a seat because it was so crowded.
Yeah.
And I found myself tucked in between a garbage can and I just watched this custodian dump all of these plastic containers into the trash and was just a little bit disheartened at how this was really the natural food show, and we were throwing away so many plastic packaging, single use. And so the rest of the show, I ended up taking pictures of all the waste, not paying attention to the food at all that was on the floor, and really decided at that point in time that I was going to find a solution. And that solution to me came from the can, because it's steel and it's magnetic and it can get picked up in any waste stream. It doesn't have to be handled differently.
Oh, I hadn't considered that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter if you put it in the trash. It's reclaimed about 70% of the time compared to 9% of the time with plastic packaging.
Oh my goodness. Right. Leave it to the scientists to just boil it down to a fact that's that easy to digest. Thank you. Oh, I like that. Okay, cans, right? Okay.
Go cans.
Go cans. Wow. Well, so, a lot of changes have happened in the world of naturals and organics, and there's a little bit of consternation within the community itself and how what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. You've been in some of the conversations around some of these initiatives and products. And I think I recently, when I introduced you to somebody, described you as like the secret sauce super scientist food architect. That's probably the longest job description or job title you've ever had.
I love it.
Behind these newer innovations, including the ones that have blurred the line, so to speak. On that note, can you talk about how the term plant-based has replaced the word vegan, at least from marketing and consumer-facing format?
So I think that's really good insight on that, because for the longest time we used the term vegan and vegetarian, and that really only describes about 3 to 5% of our population. And there was a really strong discussion around how we could change that. And the word, the whole food plant-based diet has been something that we've been using since the 80s. So really just talking about veganism in terms of plant-based was a big initiative to make sure that we could make it more inclusive and include that mainstream consumer.
Yeah.
And that really subtle, small tweak, I think, was so powerful that it triggered this movement. And that movement meant that everyone could be part of it, that it wasn't as elitist and exclusive that you could, just have a meatless Monday.
Yep.
And you were being part of the movement rather than being like, okay, you have to give up everything around plant-based products, or I'm sorry, animal products. And then, so I think that's what really triggered it, that everyone can be part of this movement to feed our global population.
Yeah, when Retail Voodoo was working with Hillary's Eat Well and Hillary Brown back when, prior to their current ownership, and they were very much talking to vegans because of the definition of a vegan lifestyle. And what we found is that the flexitarian opportunity, and that's how we pivoted their brand, was talking to them. But that really untapped is what you're articulating, this untapped market of people who wanted to eat healthier, but didn't want to be connected to kind of an ideology, which veganism has kind of an ideological component to it, many of which people didn't want to be associated with. And so just knowing that this plant-based, what a subtle and easy shift that was. And it take off immediately, or was there a little bit of massaging that needed to be done from a marketing perspective?
I think it really took off immediately. I mean, within just a very short amount of time, we were able to encapsulate a lot more people eating, like you said, flexitarian. And I think veganism sometimes has this aura of it's all about animal rights.
Right.
And so this was more around being a sustainable planet.
Yes.
And we're all in this, like we're feeding the human race.
Yeah.
So I think that's where it really did shift, and it happened fairly quickly.
Yeah. I want to just touch on this component as a person who is working as a food scientist in food technology. There, you kind of straddle a line a little bit, and that's part of what you were identifying at Expo, outside of just the waste componentry. And I feel like, I don't know if discomfort is the right word, but in regards to some of these initiatives, because this is part of your brand story, can you share the tension that you feel between working and architecting these new products and what you feel like is maybe the best thing? This is in your head, of course. We're not representing a community necessarily, but this is just kind of part of your story. Can you share where that tension is and how you feel about it?
Absolutely. So I think when I go back a little bit around why I joined the food industry, and it was really to clean up labels and make sure that we could get healthy food on everyone's plates. And, with science comes intrigue and power. And for me, at the beginning of creating plant-based alternatives, it was really because there was nothing else available,
Right.
And so it was important to feel normal and inclusive at a barbecue. That you could have, a burger on the grill or a chicken nugget. But as it's kind of evolved and taken on a little bit more mainstream, what I've seen happen is less emphasis on the health part of that. And so there was, I wouldn't say it's more of a disconnect with what I was doing at home.
Yeah.
So the foods I were eating at home were more local and sustainable and simple and whole foods. So they were following more of a whole food plant-based world rather than and so that's really where I came to the sense that I'm like, beans are really the perfect food. And I'm sorry, but they are so unsexy. But we're gonna turn them into something sexy. So I think that tension is still very much there for me.
Sure.
I know it's the industry that I help build, and I'm very much in support of the progress that we've made.
Yes.
But I do think we also have to be careful and mindful of the messages that we send to consumers.
Yeah.
So just by being plant-based, I don't think just because you eliminate meat does not mean that you're healthy.
Yeah.
So it depends what you build that back with.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the most important part of this story, is that you have to replace it with things that are healthy for your whole being, and hopefully healthy for the planet. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and there's something to be said for I don't know how to say this exactly, but when we talk about the more educated consumer, their understanding of food sciences may be a little bit more mature than people who are newer entrants into the category. And I think as manufacture this product, we need to be careful not to confuse the consumer. As you were saying, was like just simply being plant-based doesn't mean that the processing doesn't eliminate some of the characteristics that a more traditional, I don't know, meat-based or other-based type of product. So I think there's some ownership on us in this category to make sure that plant-based is, while we want to steer people that way because it is, yes, better than, we just have to be careful that we're not giving it more power or more strength than it should. Am I capturing that the right way?
I think so. I think we have to make sure that it's not just a buzzword, that it's not just,
Okay.
a low, we're not just slapping on a no fat or low fat, because
Gotcha.
then we'll turn this into a fad and not a movement.
Gotcha.
So I think that you captured it very well.
Yeah, I think when I spoke with Paula Reichel just recently, actually, she used the term health washing, and maybe that's probably what you're tipping your hat towards.
Yes, a little bit so.
Well, so I'm going to say this: beans, right? There's a lot to share about beans and its superpower-ishness, but let's talk about some of those components when we talk about food chain and waste and carbon footprint. That's in addition to the benefits for consumers in regards to health. Like, let's talk about the bean all the way through the food cycle.
Yeah. I mean, beans are really they are the perfect food on so many levels. And I think we've talked about them as an industry more around the health aspects for a long time. The angle and the lens that I think can really impact consumers today, and why I'm focusing on this messaging is because they're sustainable. They really are truly one of the few regenerative agriculture crops, and meaning they have this like symbiotic relationship with the soil and help fix the nitrogen in the soil. So it's what they're doing just by growing is something good for the planet. And then I think the waste part of that is, the nice thing is dry edible beans come straight off the field.
Yeah.
And you don't have to utilize any refrigeration. They just need to be polished. And then you can turn them into so many other things. So I think if we look at it from start to finish, they do their job on not wasting any fuel getting transported or refrigerated So.
And they can be grown. They're not as fickle as some other type of fresh or even other type of products, right? Aren't they they can grow in various climates? It might be by varietal, I'm not quite sure, but my understanding is you can put them pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, they are a very versatile crop, and I think we do grow quite a few beans in the United States. A lot of them are actually exported. We really want to make sure that we're supporting, U.S. farmers but they are very resilient crops. We've just become a monoculture crop, so a lot of the farmers don't grow them, but yes, the soils can handle them.
Sure. Yeah. So, well, let's talk about beans then in the relationship against the American diet, and the impacts that it's having in even its most simplest forms. And we could talk even about affordability and accessibility and even its inclusion in pretty much every type of diet, like cultural diet.
Yeah, I mean, where to start with that one? But I agree. Where beans consumption has declined fairly significantly since the 1950s.
Okay.
And we do know that by eating, at least a half a cup of beans today, there are extreme positive impacts. The blue zone diets are these 7 spaces on the earth where people live to over 100.
Yeah.
And the one thing they have in common is beans.
Really?
So it's one of the very few foods that you can actually add to your diet and, lose weight.
Oh, really?
Because they have such great fiber content, and they are just overall powerhouses in the the nutrition world. But the American diet, we've really just started to replace those with, meat and dairy have started to take the role. So bringing that back is going to be a shift, but you're right, they do exist in every culture. And there's so many foods that are seasoned and can taste amazing with just beans, and people don't think of them as meatless.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if I encapsulated everything you wanted to on that, but that's what I think.
Yeah. Well, I laugh a little bit when I think of beans. I am currently on the New York Times cooking Facebook page, which is a pretty intense group of cooks, chefs, from everybody from the basics all the way through the most sophisticated. And there is a subsection, I even want to call it like this cult or bean culture, if I can call it that, super fans of beans. In some instances, I'm seeing people hoarding and trying to find, there's a couple of brands specifically in the dried space that seem to have a whole bunch of varietals. Some of them are older beans that are kind of being brought back in. But talk about what is happening. What is happening with that?
I think right now there is just this, really, they haven't been explored as far as cooking. Mm-hmm. And there's so many really cool varietals. One, they are just beautiful. You can look at like an orca bean and it's this beautiful black and white bean, or canary beans that are yellow. So I think we do grow quite a few here in the U.S. Mm-hmm. They're just in smaller areas and smaller pockets of the country. Yeah. But chefs and alone have discovered that not all beans are actually, taste the same. Right. And so a lot of it is around knowledge base. You can get, different potato-y flavors. Mm-hmm. Other ways with some of the beans you can add, like if you were doing a meat replacement, like part meat and part kidney beans, you can get like moisture product with that. So there are science aspects that go with it. Mm-hmm. But I definitely think the heirloom beans are kind of this new place that's yet to be discovered. Mm-hmm. And oh yeah, I find it absolutely exciting too. I have several different varieties in my house, from chana dal to, and the lentils too. Yeah. There's a lot going on with, the black beluga lentils. Yeah. And so I think it just kind of upscales this commodity product. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that we'll see a lot of that. But there was definitely a lot of bean hoarding last year. I like to think that if everyone ate all the beans that were hoarded last year, we would like reverse climate change and obesity all in one shot.
Is there like I know this sounds so weird because we're like so specific on beans, right? But is there like is there a bean that doesn't get respect, or just has been, because it wasn't popular, should just get a little bit of extra love right now? Or is it like the black bean is the most versatile, everybody should have that in there? Like, I'm curious about it, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. So when I started on this and I decided I was going to do it, they didn't write chickpeas on any of the cans. Okay. It just said garbanzo beans. Right. And so that insight came from, I was walking in the grocery store and this, somebody much younger than me asked me if I could help her find chickpeas. And I realized that there was a disconnect between, we were teaching people how to make hummus with chickpeas. Yeah. But they didn't realize that those were garbanzo beans. Right. And so over the course of like the last, 3 to 4 years, we've seen garbanzo beans turn into chickpeas, to turn into, doing roasted chickpeas and chickpea cookie dough to, so I think chickpeas are having their little like moment, limelight. Yeah, their moment in the spotlight for now. So I don't think they're alone. I think they'll be, like, kidney beans are really versatile too, but we've only think about them for chili. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I agree.
That's so fun. Do you have fans? Is there like a product, or is there a bean in your family that seems to be the most popular right now?
Yeah. So, in the products that we sell, I would say chickpeas our blonde chickpeas are definitely our number one SKU. Oh, okay. Just out of one, I think just out of they're good products, we did source the best. And, yeah. But the other part is I think there's just a lot of buzz on social media with chickpeas and what you can do with them. So people are a little bit more curious around recipes.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to kind of transition a little bit here. Christy Lagali or Lagali, I should say, of Rebellious Foods, who I spoke with recently. She's the one that connected the two of us. And I think you guys met through the Good Food Institute. I talk a little bit about that relationship and how it's maybe transforming how you look at the business, or how it's helping you kind of spread the word on the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so the Good Food Institute, started just a little over 5 years ago, and I think Christy and I were some of the early people involved. And I had a lot stronger role, so I'm just an advisor for them around a lot of times for startups to make sure that they're keeping our food supply safe.
Gotcha.
and lending some technical support to make sure that they can kind of push through and get their products out the door. But really, the Good Food Institute has done some remarkable things in raising awareness around plant-based diets. And I think in a lot, partnerships with large organizations and corporations to facilitate that. I think one of the biggest areas of focus right now is around cellular-based meat.
Okay.
For the Good Food Institute, and that's really, growing meat products from,
different sources.
Yeah, different sources, and, the structure around that to scaffold it and make it feel like actual meat, like a muscle of meat.
Yeah.
So it's, they're definitely pioneering a lot of the, I would say it took on as a global phenomenon, which was pretty cool.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, it's been neat to watch kind of just short-term growth, how much they've pushed out. So.
Yeah. I think I think the interesting part for me is the amount of interest that's coming from Silicon Valley, that mostly because food wasn't sexy until I think the people in tech saw that food technology and they got it. Right. And so the funding and the financing that's coming from that community, transitioning from tech into food and food tech, is pushing a lot of boundaries. Some of them are scary for people. In other instances, we're finding opportunities to kind of tap into markets and to help consumers that have been underserved. And I think that's where beans kind of seem like they kind of fit that need of they're affordable, they're accessible, they're easy to transport. How are you in the bean community? Because I understand that you are in the bean community of, yes, there is one, because there's always a community around anything exciting. This group of people, how are you helping consumers who've been kind of moved away from whole foods and natural foods kind of reinsert beans into their diets, aside from physically giving it to them? And I'm thinking about recipes and education around those types of products. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So really for us, it's showing people what they can do with a simple can of beans. I like to say that you could do so much with a can of beans. Like when I tell people that I was launching, like that's almost a funny story. When I tell people, like I told them, I'm starting my own food company and I'm one of the most innovative people in the food industry. And so they were just like, couldn't wait to see what I was doing, like, what are you going to do in food tech? Because there's and when I showed off my can of beans, I flat faces, are you kidding? This is what you're going to do with food? But for me, it was oh my gosh, you can invent for the rest of your life with a can of beans.
Right.
And that's really the way we started to engage our consumers. We have done so much on social media to show them what you can do. Whether it's last week I was taking pictures of a red bean and barbecue slider that I had roasted pineapple on top of, and it was to die for.
Wow.
And so just showing people that they can do so much with a can of beans rather than just I don't know, we think of it as just chili and it has a weird texture, but just knowing that you can do so much with it. You can mash it, you can roast it, there's simple ways to incorporate it.
Nice.
Yeah, so we've done a lot with recipe development to get people to understand the benefit.
Oh, that's great.
Of what we're doing.
Now, before we kind of mosey on over to the questions that I ask everybody at the end of every show, I want to make sure that we were able to touch on everything that you wanted to share with our audience today. Is there anything that you're like really want to share about either what you're wanting to do with the brand from a long-term standpoint, or kind of some learnings that you had when you were kind of through this transformation?
Oh, it's been quite a transformation. But I think we covered off most of it. I think just, keeping people aware that utilizing their pantry and really focusing on the pantry helps reduce food waste. And because you're not throwing away perishable ingredients all the time.
Right.
And realizing that you can cook so many fresh meals from your pantry, that it's a disconnect for so many people. But if you make a chili, you realize you're using, canned beans and canned tomatoes and maybe jarred garlic and spices, and all of those things create a fresh meal. Yeah. And so that's really what I hope that we can accomplish long term.
I was watching, the Food Network has made some significant pivots over the pandemic, and Guy Fieri's got some grocery games or something, and he's modified it and asked chefs to make products. Like the last show that I saw was to make meals with $20 using basically pantry food, and beans, I think, were in all the dishes that the chefs made. So really very interesting crossover for me there in that thinking there. I think there's some room. Maybe we can get some chefs intrigued and push more in that direction. Let's get us out of chilies, hey?
Right. And I always joke, I always talk about all the awesomeness of our beans and our planet, but they also score really well on taste and quality. Yeah. We definitely have the best beans. So.
Oh my goodness. Well, listen, I wonder if there's some sort of, we talked a lot about some beans, and we touched on kind of food tech a little bit. I always like to have some sort of fun informational tidbit that people can share over a cocktail whenever that might happen again. What would you like to share that's kind of interesting for our listeners today?
Well, I would have to say, recently I was asked to participate in a ag class at Penn State, and they were working on this wicked problem or ethical practice that we face in our field, and they asked me to pose a question for them. Okay. And so maybe that's the thing that and the question I posed for them, and they have all semester to figure out the answer, was whether food companies should be responsible for recycling transparency. Oh. And is it enough? Is it enough to just put a recycle symbol on the package without really helping the consumers understand how much work goes into that? So many of our packages are not recycled or not recyclable, and nobody's really monitoring to make sure that there's truth in that. And so
interesting.
With only 9% of plastics recycled, I think we really need to focus on that. So I guess that would be my weird little tidbit. It's just, how could think about that? Good conversation starter.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure it was PepsiCo that have seen recently pushing a pretty aggressive recycling campaign, even from an advertising standpoint. They're buying media about recycling and then the efforts that they're doing. So I think somebody's hearing. I think somebody's listening. There's still a lot of plastic.
Well, and it's not just that. There's a lot of containers that we don't think about that actually are not recyclable at all. They just require so much through programs like TerraCycle. Yeah. And making consumers just aware that, maybe your water box isn't recyclable.
Right. So. Right. Are there any other women leaders or even rising stars in our industry, or not, that you would like to elevate or just simply publicly admire, girl crush on, however you want to call it, for the work that they're doing right now?
Yeah, I always struggle with this question, which makes me kind of sad when I struggle with it a little bit. But there is one woman, Passion Murray, out of Detroit, who has she's a co-founder for Detroit Dirt, and they really focus on regenerative agriculture and educating the public around regenerative agriculture and how the best practices to kind of restore the balance in our environment. So very much admire the work she's doing out of Detroit.
Wow. Okay. And what brands or what food trends do you have your eye on, and why? I don't know if you can even answer that. Can you?
I don't know if I have the right answer for that. I don't know if
Well,
I watch any particular.
Opinion.
Yeah, I don't know if I like. Well, I don't know. Like if I'm watching any brand to see what's going to happen. I do find the idea of how the fashion industry is going to handle all the sustainable practices around fast fashion. So I think I look to that for influence on what's going to happen in the food industry.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I think I take some. So I don't have a specific brand that I'm keeping my eye on, just more of an industry.
Gotcha. How are you keeping yourself sane and centered these days? Now, I know you're a single mom, so I don't even know if that's even a legit question to ask.
Well, no, I do. I think it's been fun starting my own company and doing everything that I would normally, have other people do.
Oh,
and
really?
One thing that I've started to create, I've started to do my own food photography and food styling.
Really?
And that's been really rewarding and frustrating that you spend a whole day to get one shot. But and sometimes they're horrible, but you can still see them on my social media. But so yeah, that's been keeping me sane, is just kind of learning that and getting that creative outlet.
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay, great. Now, if people wanted to connect with you, either about the brand that you are, that your brand, or regarding kind of anything else, I suppose, in any way, how do you prefer people reach out to you? LinkedIn, or do you want them to connect with you through your website?
Oh, they can do it anyway. Okay. I mean, I'm happy to give people my email, which is Maggie@8trackfoods.com, or they can connect with me on LinkedIn. I think both of those ways they can subscribe to our website. But I always tell people, don't be afraid to hit me up a few times. I try to get to everybody, but sometimes things get lost in the shuffle. So you won't bug me. Just try again.
Okay, Maggie, thank you so much for your time today. I'm really excited to see what happens with 8-Track, and then some of those, for those of you that might be interested, I bet if you were to walk down the grocery aisle, you would see a lot of Maggie's work in number of categories. Just know that this super scientist exists. Like sometimes I think we forget, even in our own industry, we forget that the magic actually starts way back in what I call the scientist sandbox, right?
I like that. The scientist sandbox.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today. Really wishing you best of luck, and I look forward to our next connection.
Very grateful to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. This episode is sponsored by Retail Voodoo, a creative marketing firm specializing in growing, fixing, and reinventing brands in the food, beverage, wellness, and fitness industries. If your Naturals brand is in need of positioning, package design, or marketing activation, we're here to help. You can find more information at retail-voodoo.com. And so there you go. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to this channel and share with your network. Until next time, be well and do gooder.